So I went from running obstacle course races to the entire right side of my body going numb over the course of a week. It felt like my body had fallen asleep. You know those pins and needles that you get in a leg if you've been sitting on it weirdly for too long. So it started in my right hand. It slowly went down my arm, down my torso, down into my butt, my leg, and then finally into my foot, before I decided to drive myself to the hospital for some answers. So in this video, I'm going to share specific symptoms that could lead to an MS diagnosis, how I received mine, just a quick recap because I've done a full video on my diagnosis, and just things that you should look out for if you are trying to figure out some weird things that are going on in your body. So in my diagnosis video, which I will link so that you can watch it maybe after this video, I talked about how lucky I was to actually go from symptoms to a diagnosis within a week. Some people, it takes months, even years to get a diagnosis. And I was diagnosed quickly. I drove myself to the hospital and I was able to advocate for them to keep searching for answers until they gave me the appropriate tests that allowed them to give me a definitive diagnosis. So I went from a CT scan to an MRI with contrast, and that allowed them to diagnose me with multiple sclerosis. There was a few key things that had to happen before I drove myself to the hospital. So as I started developing this numbness and tingling, I was really confused. I didn't know what it was. Because I was doing obstacle course racing and doing a lot of training, I thought I might have had a pinched nerve in my neck from overdoing it at the training facility that I was at. And I actually needed to go see a new chiropractor. So when you go see a new chiropractor, you fill out quite a lot of intake forms and you give family history. And because my father has MS, the new chiropractor that I had seen at the time suggested, maybe you should go and get some x-rays done. I don't know why he said x-rays, because if he thought I might have had MS, x-rays are not the way that you diagnose it, but that got my brain thinking, oh, I need further testing to figure out what this is. So because of that suggestion, as my body started going numb, I decided to drive myself to the hospital for answers. I was also dealing with a really bad migraine at the same time as this attack. I didn't know it was an MS attack at the time, but I'm thankful that I went to the hospital because then I was able to get the tests that I needed. If you go through a family doctor, it could take much longer to actually get a referral to a neurologist and then for the neurologist to requisition the tests. I waited at the hospital because I wasn't in dire need of the testing. I waited until they had a free MRI slot open. So I was told at the hospital that I attended, they have a certain amount of MRIs that they can access throughout the day. Because I wasn't an emergency, I just said, I will wait for the next available one. So I started out with a CT in the morning, and then I think I had to wait the entire day for an MRI. They did the MRI without contrast. They did see demyelination on my cervical spine. And then they said, we need to repeat it in the morning with contrast. So I stayed overnight. I talk about this all in my diagnosis video. Although it was a really long day at the hospital, I was able to get answers within 24 hours. If this video is resonating with you, would you like and subscribe? If you're newly diagnosed with MS or you're trying to figure out whether or not you have MS, my heart goes out to you. Thanks for being here. I do share lots of tips and tricks on how to live well with MS, so I hope you hang out. I want you to know that you're not alone. Okay, now let's talk about what other symptoms you might experience at an onset of an MS attack. So first off, I do want to say that MS is known as a snowflake disease, which means not every person will experience the same symptoms. Similar, there's not ever, snowflakes don't repeat. So not everyone will experience the same symptoms. When you have your first MS attack, it might be different than what I experienced, but numbness and tingling is quite common. There is also fatigue, not normal fatigue. There is weakness or walking difficulties. There could be balance issues or dizziness. My dad has balance issues. You could have bladder or bowel problems. That could be trouble voiding or voiding too frequently. There might be some cognitive changes that you might notice. Mood changes. You might have nerve pain. There is spasticity. You could have vision problems. I've heard of optical neuritis being quite common. And then there's also something called the MS hug. I am actually in the middle of a flare right now, and I have the MS hug, which involves basically feeling like someone is squeezing me around my rib cage. So if you're going the family doctor route and you are trying to get to the bottom of whether or not you have MS, ask for a referral to a neurologist And then when you see the neurologist, ask what tests will be done to confirm a diagnosis. So for me, it was MRI with and without contrast. And then I was able to forego the lumbar puncture. I do believe that there is still a lumbar puncture that could be requisitioned as part of the diagnosis process. They look at a patient based on the McDonald's criteria. And because of the amount of lesions that were on my spine and on my brain, I qualified under the McDonald's criteria to have MS. So the McDonald criteria, let me just read, is the standard internationally recognized guidelines used by neurologists to diagnose multiple sclerosis accurately and early. So another test that I've had since my diagnosis, and this is to track the progression of the disease, but I am now getting blood work to test my neurofilament light chains. I don't know if they're doing that anymore at like the time of diagnosis, but I do know it's something that they're doing to track disease progression. So I do want to say, if you're experiencing any sort of symptoms that are frustrating and you can't seem to get to the bottom of it, hang in there. I don't want to put fear in you, but if you're watching this video, someone has potentially suggested that you might have MS. So just know that it is not a death sentence. This is something that you can manage. And so I would definitely recommend, if you're going the family doctor route, to ask for a neurologist and then get to the bottom of it through testing. And if you've been diagnosed with MS and you found my channel, I would love it if you could subscribe so we can walk alongside each other as you learn to live well with multiple sclerosis. And if you haven't downloaded my free autoimmune thriving guide, I have a link in the description that you can download, and it will help you just figure out some different lifestyle changes that you can do to manage the disease. Thanks for being here. Now go and live well, and we'll see you in the next video.